All right, world history students, these are your slides about prehistory. These slides will review some concepts we've already talked about and hit some specific facts that you need to know about this unit. So here is a review of some key places that you put on your map. We have the first emergence of humans in East Africa. We have the Neolithic settlements for agriculture at Aleppo and Jericho in the Middle East, and Çatalhöyük in what is now Turkey. And then up here we have Stonehenge. And we're going to come back to these three locations later in these slides. So when we talk about prehistory, we're talking about the time before written records, and we divide that time up into two eras, the Paleolithic age, which means old stone, and the Neolithic age, which means new stone. How do we study this time period without any writing? Archaeology is the science of using artifacts to interpret the past. So archaeologists find artifacts and fossils and other remains from human settlements in order to interpret the lives of past people. One way that archaeologists use scientific techniques to understand the past is through carbon dating. So this is a scientific process where you take an artifact to a lab and you measure the degradation, how much the carbon in that object has broken down, and that tells archaeologists how old that artifact is. And this is a technique that has been used to date many ancient artifacts. So when we talk about the earliest peoples, or Homo sapiens, that's our species, we're talking about a species that emerged in East Africa a long time ago, and then began to migrate all throughout the world, and eventually peopled the entire earth. These people were reliant on the plants and animals that they found in order to survive, and they were on the move. They didn't have permanent homes. They were nomads. So here is our map of human migration. We have our human origins in East Africa and then movement of people all over the world. So let's talk about characteristics of the Paleolithic era. So what was it like during Paleolithic times? People were nomadic. They migrated because they needed to find food and water and shelter. And the easiest way to do that was to follow animal herds around. They made stone tools. We get the name Stone Age from the fact that they made their tools out of stones. They lived in clans, which were small groups, and they developed spoken language, and they created records of a sort through their cave art. So these are the Lascaux cave paintings. They are in France, and this is the most famous example of Paleolithic cave art. So take a moment to look at the subjects of these paintings and think about, what is the big thing here? What do these people care about based on their artwork? What did they think was important to memorialize? Again, nomadic means that you don't have a permanent home, and this is the major characteristic of the Paleolithic age. Then we move into the Neolithic age, and that age is started by a thing we call the Neolithic Revolution, which just means that people started farming. It wasn't a single event, it happened slowly over time. So people developed agriculture, they started farming, they domesticated animals, so they started to raise their own herds and keep their own animals for human use. So they had food, they had other products from the animals, they had cloth that they could weave from their furs and hair, and they made more advanced tools out of stone. And now that we live in one place all the time, we can have more stuff and we can keep a surplus. So if we have extra crops on our farm, we need a place to store those. So people started making pottery in order to store the food that they produced on their farms. So let's look at some different Neolithic settlements. So the first is Stonehenge. This is one of the most famous Neolithic sites in the world. Nobody is quite sure why it was built. It is this giant circle of stones. These stones were carried here from far away, we know, and we're not sure exactly what this site was used for. Take a moment to think about it, and you'll need to answer a question in the Edpuzzle about what the use of this site was. Then we have Aleppo. Aleppo was one of the earliest centers of trade and one of the earliest known sites of agriculture. You can see in this picture some later remains of what we call monumental, which just means really big architecture in Aleppo. This was not made during the Neolithic times, but it still was occupied later in history. This is Jericho, and the part that you're seeing in this picture is one of the earliest areas of Jericho, though it was built later than Neolithic times. Jericho was another center of trade and agriculture. It's very close to Aleppo, and this is the longest continually occupied city in the world. So people have been living there without stop for about 10,000 years. Lastly, we have Çatalhöyük. Çatalhöyük was a major center of agriculture and trade, and it is unique in that the people there built homes with flat roofs, and the doors to their homes were in the roofs. They didn't have a door like in the wall. They entered their home from above, so they would go up a ladder and in. So take a moment to think about what would be an advantage of building your home that way. Another interesting characteristic of this site is that they built their homes about 5 miles from the fields where they grew their food. So take a moment to think about what would be the advantage of living so far from where your food source was. Why might that be good for you? Why would someone design their city that way? So, to review, Stonehenge is an archaeological site in England. It was started during the Neolithic age. Aleppo and Jericho are two of our earliest cities. They were centers of trade and agriculture. And Çatalhöyük is a site of Neolithic settlement with a large center of agriculture and with a unique building style. It is still currently under excavation in modern-day Turkey. Modern-day Turkey has a lot of different names at different times in history. Sometimes you'll see it called Anatolia, like it is on this slide. Sometimes it'll be called Asia Minor. Sometimes it'll be called Turkey. It's all the same thing. Here is a quick vocabulary review. If you're missing any terms on your vocab page in your folder, you can use these definitions to take care of that. And here are some big concept reviews, so you can return to this information to review for your quiz and test coming up. Thank you.